The room was dimly lit, the faint hum of the air conditioner blending with the rhythmic sound of my heartbeat. His touch was warm and deliberate, his hands exploring places I hadn't felt alive in years. My breath hitched as his lips brushed against my neck, a trail of heat following his every move. I wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to be doing this. But the electric thrill coursing through me drowned out any sense of guilt. "I've never done this before," I whispered, my voice shaky but filled with anticipation. He smiled, a knowing, confident smile, and leaned in closer, his voice deep and velvety. "Relax. Tonight's about you." Just as the moment seemed poised to ignite into something uncontrollable, let me pause for a second. If you've made it this far, you're clearly intrigued. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Trust me, it gets even wilder. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I'm just an ordinary woman, or at least that's what I thought until recently. Married for nearly a decade, my life with my husband, Mark, was comfortable, predictable, and, dare I say it, mundane. Don't get me wrong, Mark is a good man, the kind of man most women dream of marrying. But somewhere along the way, the passion fizzled out, leaving behind nothing but routine. Then came that fateful wine night with my girlfriends. We were sitting in Sarah's living room, sipping glasses of Pinot Noir, when the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Have you ever been with a black man?" Jessica asked, her eyes sparkling mischievously. The room fell silent for a moment, and then laughter erupted. "Jessica, you're unbelievable," Sarah chided, but her face betrayed curiosity. "I'm serious," Jessica insisted. "I'm telling you, once you go black—" She trailed off, letting her expression say the rest. I laughed along with them, but the seed had been planted. Jessica went on about her experience, how it was the most passionate, mind-blowing night of her life. I tried to brush it off, but her words lingered in my mind long after the laughter faded. That night, as I lay beside Mark, staring at the ceiling, a nagging thought crept in. What if? Weeks passed, but the idea refused to leave me. I found myself paying more attention to black men I encountered, at the grocery store, at the gym, even on television. It was like my mind had opened a door I couldn't close. Then I met him. His name was Marcus, and he worked at a marketing firm that occasionally collaborated with my company. From the moment we were introduced, I couldn't ignore the magnetic pull between us. He was tall, with smooth dark skin and a smile that could disarm even the coldest heart. His presence was commanding, and his deep voice sent shivers down my spine. Our interactions were professional at first, just casual conversations about work. But there was an undercurrent, a silent acknowledgement of something unspoken, yet undeniable. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up a meeting, Marcus lingered in the conference room. "You're different," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. I laughed nervously. "Different how?" "In a good way," he replied, his gaze never wavering. My heart raced, and I quickly excused myself, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. The encounter replayed in my mind for days. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but the thrill was intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I decided to take a risk. It started with a text, a simple, "Hi, hope your day's going well." Innocent enough, or so I told myself. His reply came almost instantly, and before I knew it, we were texting every day. The conversations became more personal, more suggestive. He made me feel seen, desired, and appreciated in a way I hadn't felt in years. By the time he suggested meeting for coffee, I was already too far gone to turn back. The day we met for coffee felt like stepping into another life, a life where I wasn't a suburban wife living by the rules of monogamy, but a woman chasing the thrill of the forbidden. I had chosen a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far enough from anyone who might recognize me. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, his commanding presence impossible to ignore. "You look stunning," he said, standing as I approached. His words sent a flush of warmth through me. I wasn't used to being noticed like this anymore, and the way he looked at me made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. "Thank you," I replied, sitting down and avoiding his gaze. My hands trembled as I picked up the menu, pretending to be engrossed in the list of overpriced lattes. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly from work to hobbies to personal dreams. Marcus had a way of making me feel at ease, his deep, smooth voice laced with charm and intelligence. But beneath the surface of our seemingly innocent conversation was an undercurrent of something far more dangerous. "So, tell me," he said, leaning forward with a sly smile. "Why did you really agree to meet me?" His question caught me off guard, and I fumbled for an answer. I don't know," I stammered, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I think you do," he said, his voice low and deliberate. My pulse quickened, and I felt a heat rise in my cheeks. He wasn't wrong. I did know why I was there. I had crossed a line long before this meeting, and now I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't control. That night, I lay awake replaying our conversation. His words echoed in my mind, stirring something deep within me. I knew I should stop, walk away before things went too far, but the thrill of the unknown, the promise of something new and exhilarating, was too tempting to resist. The next time Marcus texted me, I didn't hesitate to reply. Our messages became more frequent, more intimate. He would send me compliments that made my heart race, and I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for his name to appear on the screen. "Let's have dinner," he suggested one evening, and before I could think of an excuse, I agreed. The restaurant was upscale and intimate, the kind of place where couples whispered over candlelight and shared stolen glances. I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, one that hugged my curves and made me feel beautiful. When Marcus saw me, his eyes lit up, and he stood to greet me with a hug that lingered just a little too long. "You're breathtaking," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. The dinner was perfect. Delicious food, flowing wine, and a chemistry between us that was impossible to ignore. By the time dessert arrived, I could feel the walls of my resolve crumbling. "You know," he said, his hand brushing against mine, "I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day we met." My breath caught, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The intensity of his gaze, the warmth of his hand on mine, was almost too much to bear. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered more to myself than to him. "But you are," he said, his voice a gentle reassurance, "and that tells me everything I need to know." That night, as I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, excitement, fear, and desire all collided, leaving me breathless. I knew I was on the brink of something that could change everything, but instead of turning back, I found myself craving more. The text came late one Friday evening. "What are you doing right now?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing as I tried to think of an appropriate response. Mark was upstairs in the den, probably falling asleep in front of the TV. I could hear the faint sound of a football game and the occasional clink of his beer bottle against the coffee table. "Nothing much. You?" I replied, trying to sound casual, though my palms were sweating. "Thinking about you." 3 words. 3 simple words that made my stomach flip and my pulse race. Before I could overthink it, another text appeared. "Let's meet." I hesitated. This wasn't coffee or dinner. This was different, and we both knew it. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, my mind battling between guilt and desire. Finally, I typed back, "Where?" The place he chose was discreet, a small bar tucked away in a part of town I rarely visited. I told Mark I was meeting an old friend for drinks, a lie that rolled off my tongue far too easily. When I arrived, Marcus was already there, leaning casually against the bar. He looked up as I entered, his face breaking into that devastating smile that made my knees weak. "You came," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I shouldn't have," I replied, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. "But you did," he said, echoing his words from the dinner, and just like before, they disarmed me. We sat at a secluded booth, the dim lighting casting shadows that felt as secretive as the moment itself. He ordered us drinks, but I barely touched mine. The air between us was thick with tension, the unspoken attraction finally coming to a head. At some point, I stopped trying to fight it. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His hand reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I looked up to meet his gaze. "You don't have to," he said, his voice firm yet tender. We left the bar together, the unspoken agreement between us making words unnecessary. My heart pounded as we walked to his car, my mind racing with both fear and anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his tone gentle but serious. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The motel was small but clean, tucked away on a quiet street. As we entered the room, I felt a rush of nerves and excitement so intense it was almost dizzying. He closed the door behind us, and for a moment, we just stood there, the gravity of what we were about to do hanging heavy in the air. Then he stepped closer, his hands gently cupping my face as he kissed me. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and unlike anything I'd felt in years. His lips were soft yet commanding, his hands warm and firm as they moved to my waist, pulling me closer. I melted into him, all the guilt and hesitation dissolving in the heat of the moment. His touch was confident and knowing, as if he could read every desire I'd tried to suppress. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured against my lips, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "Me too," I admitted, the words barely audible as he began to trail kisses down my neck. The rest of the night was a blur of passion and discovery, each moment more intense than the last. He was everything I had imagined and more, attentive, skilled, and unrelenting in his focus on my pleasure. It was as if he had unlocked a part of me I didn't know existed, and I gave myself over to the experience completely. As I lay beside him afterward, my body still humming from the encounter, a wave of emotions washed over me. Guilt lingered in the background, but it was drowned out by a deep sense of satisfaction and liberation. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle as he looked at me with concern. "I am," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it. The morning after my night with Marcus, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the bedside table. It was Mark, my husband. "Good morning, babe," he said cheerfully when I answered. "You didn't come home too late, right?" "No, not too late," I lied, glancing at Marcus, who was still asleep beside me. My voice was steady, but my heart raced. "Great, I made some coffee. See you when you get back," Mark said before hanging up. I stared at the phone, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. But when I looked back at Marcus, his peaceful expression, his chest rising and falling in rhythm, I felt an unfamiliar mix of satisfaction and guilt. I slipped out of the motel quietly, promising Marcus I'd text him later. The drive home was surreal. The streets were just beginning to stir with life, and the sunlight felt almost accusatory. When I walked through the front door, Mark greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, none the wiser about how I had spent my night. I plastered on a smile, determined to bury the guilt and pretend everything was normal. But nothing about my life felt normal anymore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. I threw myself into my daily routines, playing the role of the devoted wife, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Marcus constantly. His touch, his smile, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. It didn't take long before I found myself texting him again. One message led to another, and soon we were meeting regularly. We were careful, always choosing places far from home, always ensuring no one we knew would see us. He was respectful of my boundaries, never pressuring me but always there when I reached out. The secrecy was thrilling, but it also began to take its toll. Balancing my double life was exhausting, and I found myself lying more than I ever thought I could. "Where were you?" Mark asked one evening when I came home later than usual. "Traffic," I replied smoothly, forcing a smile. "You know how it gets." He nodded, accepting my explanation without question, but each lie felt like a small dagger to my conscience. The guilt was always there, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. But every time I thought about ending things with Marcus, the memory of his touch, his passion, pulled me back in. "You're addictive," I told him one evening as we lay tangled in the sheets of yet another motel room. "You're worth it," he replied, his hand tracing lazy circles on my back. In the midst of all this, I found myself wondering how far I could take this double life. Would I eventually be caught? Would Mark start to notice the changes in me, the sudden bursts of happiness, the newfound confidence? And yet I couldn't stop. Marcus had awakened something in me, a part of myself I didn't know I was missing. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with me. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more of these intense and real-life stories. Things are about to get even more complicated, so stay tuned. The first time I almost got caught was a wake-up call, or at least it should have been. It started like any other rendezvous with Marcus. We had planned to meet at a new spot, a boutique hotel a few towns over. I told Mark I was meeting a colleague for a work project, and even packed my laptop to make the alibi convincing. "Don't stay out too late," Mark said as I kissed him goodbye. "You've been working so hard lately." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. His kindness made the lie sting more than usual. The hotel was perfect, private, quiet, and upscale enough to make me feel less guilty about what I was doing. Marcus was already waiting when I arrived, his presence as magnetic as ever. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he said, pulling me into a kiss as soon as we were inside the room. The hours we spent together were intoxicating, a blur of passion and laughter that made me forget the life waiting for me back home. But as the sun began to set, reality came crashing back. "I should go," I said reluctantly, pulling away from Marcus's embrace. "Stay a little longer," he murmured, his lips brushing against my neck. "I can't," I said, even as my resolve weakened. As I drove home, my mind replayed the day's events, a mix of euphoria and guilt swirling in my chest. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice the car following me. It wasn't until I turned into my neighborhood and saw the headlights make the same turn that I realized something was off. My heart raced as I pulled into the driveway and watched the car slow down before speeding off. Was it just a coincidence, or had someone been watching me? Inside the house, Mark was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "You're back earlier than I expected," he said, glancing at the clock. "Yeah, we wrapped up sooner than I thought," I replied, forcing a smile. As I set my bag down, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Did you make it home safe?" I quickly silenced the phone, my hands trembling. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, noticing my fidgeting. "Nothing," I said, grabbing a glass of water to steady myself. "Just tired." That night I barely slept. The car, the text, the lies, they all weighed on me, creating a storm of paranoia. Had Mark noticed something? Was the car following me just a random stranger or something more sinister? The next morning, I woke up to find Mark staring at me, a strange look on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Of course," I said, forcing a laugh. "Why wouldn't I be?" "You've just seemed different lately," he said, his brow furrowed. "Distracted." My stomach dropped, but I quickly recovered. "Work has been stressful," I said, hoping the excuse would suffice. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't entirely convinced. I tried to pull back from Marcus after that close call, but it was easier said than done. Every time I tried to end things, he would remind me of how good we were together, how alive I felt when I was with him. "You're overthinking," he said during one of our phone calls. "No one suspects anything." But I wasn't so sure. The paranoia lingered, and I found myself jumping at shadows, constantly checking my phone and second-guessing my every move. In the next chapter, I'll share how I finally decided to take control of the situation, or at least, I thought I did. But things didn't go as planned, and the lies I'd built my double life on began to unravel. The paranoia from the close call never completely faded, but I found ways to manage it. Marcus and I became even more careful, choosing our meeting places meticulously and limiting our communication to a secure messaging app. But no matter how discreet we were, the weight of the lies began to take a toll. I'd catch myself staring at Mark during dinner, wondering if he could see through me, if he knew the truth, but was waiting for me to confess. One night, as we sat in our living room watching a movie, he suddenly paused the screen. "Is everything okay with us?" he asked, his voice steady but concerned. I froze, my heart pounding. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Why do you ask?" "You've just been distant," he replied, his eyes searching mine. "If there's something wrong, you can tell me." His words were like a dagger to my chest. Here was the man who had stood by me through everything, offering me unconditional love, and I was betraying him in the worst possible way. "I'm fine," I said softly, reaching for his hand. "I promise." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. The next time I saw Marcus, I couldn't ignore the nagging guilt. "We need to talk," I said as soon as I entered the hotel room. His smile faltered. "That doesn't sound good." "It's not," I admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I can't keep doing this." He sat beside me, his expression unreadable. "Why now?" "Because it's not fair. To Mark, to you, or to me," I said, my voice trembling. "This was never supposed to go this far." Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "But that doesn't make it any easier." "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. He reached out, brushing a tear from my cheek. "Don't be. What we had was real, even if it wasn't meant to last." Walking away from Marcus was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was also the first step toward reclaiming my life. At home, I threw myself into my marriage, determined to make things right. I started planning date nights, cooking Mark's favorite meals, and listening to him talk about his day with genuine interest. For a while, it seemed to work. The distance between us began to shrink, and I felt a renewed sense of connection, but the guilt never fully disappeared. One evening, as I sat alone in the bedroom, I decided to write down my story. Not to confess to Mark or anyone else, but to unburden myself of the secrets I had been carrying. And that's how you're hearing this now. To those of you watching, I'm not telling my story to glorify what I did or to seek forgiveness. I know what I did was wrong, and I live with that knowledge every day. But I also know I'm not alone. If you've ever felt trapped in your own life, torn between what you have and what you think you want, I hope my story gives you something to think about. Thank you for listening. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to me. And remember, sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we keep from ourselves.